Hey, how's it going? In this video, I'm going to show you some super sneaky traps that you can play against the Caro-Kann defense if you're white, and one of them is actually checkmate in 6 moves. So make sure you stick around to the end of the video so you don't miss that one, but let's jump right in. So we're going to start with e4, and if black plays c6, he's setting up to play d5, which is the Caro-Kann defense. And we're going to play what's called the two knights attack. There's a lot of sneaky traps in the two knights attack, so that's why we're going for this route. So knight f3, d5, knight to c3. So this is the two knights attack of the Caro-Kann defense. Now black's probably most common move is capture on e4, but real quick I want to show you if they play d4, trying to gain some space in the center, you can play knight to e2, and you're double attacking it here. And the most logical move for black is to defend it with the c5 pawn. And now you can play c3, again putting a lot of pressure on this d4 square. If they capture, simply recapture, and you're going to play d4 next move and have a nice strong center. Great start for white. So a lot of times black will try this d3 move. The idea is they're attacking your knight and they're kind of jamming up your bishops here a little bit. All right, this guy's stuck and this guy's going to be stuck after they play c4. It looks like it could be pretty good for black, but actually it's terrible, and here's why. You play knight to f4, double attacking the d3 pawn. It's only defended by the queen. And if you look, the only option that black has to add another defender is by playing c4. And now you have a really cool fork. Queen to a4, it's check on the king, and it's hitting this undefended c4 pawn. And black can't save them both. So obviously he has to get out of check, maybe knight to c6. And now you simply gobble up these two pawns. Queen takes c4. After maybe knight f6, you play queen takes d3. And white's just completely winning up to two central pawns. Black has really no compensation at all. This is great for white. So the main move for black is probably to capture on e4. Now you can recapture with your knight on e4. Now, most Caro-Kann players have two general ideas that they like to follow. So the first one is they'll bring this knight to d7 to defend this f6 square so they can bring this knight out. And if you were to trade, they'll recapture with their knight and avoid double pawns. So that's one thing. And then, even more common than that, they like to bring this bishop out, either to f5 or to g4. That's the whole point of playing the Caro-Kann defense instead of like the French defense, because in the French defense you play e6, but then you block your bishop. Caro-Kann defense, you leave it open, so they really like to play these bishop moves. So we're going to cover some traps that you can play against all three of those options. But let's start with bishop to g4. So after bishop g4, you can play bishop to c4. You're eyeing up this f7 square, and you're setting up a lot of sneaky traps already. If black is not very careful in his next move, he's going to be into all kinds of trouble. So as an example, let's say he plays this relatively innocent looking move, knight f6, developing a piece, going towards the center. He's actually completely lost at this point. You can play this killer move, knight to e5, sacrificing your queen. And if black accepts the sacrifice, he simply gets checkmated in 7 moves. Bishop takes f7 is checkmate. And really, he doesn't have any other great options. You're hitting the bishop as well. If he tries to go back to maybe h5 to defend this f7 square and his bishop is defended with his knight, you can sacrifice your queen again, simply capture it. And when he captures with his knight, bishop takes f7 is checkmate yet again. So we'll jump back to this position and we'll say, let's say he plays something different than knight f6. What if he tries knight to d7? Well, you have to be careful. You can't play the same move, knight to e5 now, setting up checkmate, because he simply captures your knight and he defends his bishop. And so now you're losing. But you have this other move. Let me back up. Bishop takes f7 check immediately is actually completely winning for white. And here's why. After he recaptures, you play knight to g5, knight f to g5. You're setting up check on his king, as well as the queen is hitting his bishop. After he retreats, you simply capture, and you've got all kinds of great ideas like queen e6, queen f7 checkmate, possibly knight to e6, forking the queen and the g7 pawn. He's weak along this diagonal. His king can't castle. Completely winning for white. So that's another one to be aware of. If they try knight d7, it's also completely losing for black. So if we jump back to this position, black's best move, and really the only move that they can play, is e6. They have to block this bishop, otherwise there's going to be some sort of trap that they're going to fall into. If they play e6, this is a relatively equal position. It's slightly better for white. You can maybe play h3, kick the bishop away, or just d3, castle, something kind of normal. But just be aware that e6 is decent move for black, and you're going to be in an equal position if that happens. Alright, so I've jumped back to this position. Instead of bishop to g4, I want to show you what you can do against bishop to f5. And this is very common. A lot of Caro-Kann players like to put their bishop along this diagonal and put pressure on your knight. But you've got some really cool tricks. So first of all, we're going to go knight to g3, putting pressure on the bishop. And usually black will retreat to g6. And now you can play h4. It's a very aggressive move. The idea is that next move you're playing h5, trapping the bishop. So normally black will play h6 to create a safe space for the bishop to run to. But now you can play knight to e5, hitting the bishop, and black really doesn't want to let you capture it. For example, if they play like knight f6 and let you take this, they have all kinds of weak squares over here by their king, and just as an example, bishop to d3 hitting this pawn, well, how does black defend it? There's no good moves. Really the only thing they can do is play king to f7. But after queen to e2, you have ideas of bishop c4 check followed by queen e6. Black can't castle. This bishop is terrible back here. It's just really bad for black. So they don't really want to let you do that. So most players at this point in the game will retreat to h7. But now you have a killer move with your queen. Queen to h5, lining up on this f7 square, threatening checkmate. And black doesn't have a lot of good ways to prevent it. If they bring their knight out to attack your queen, doesn't stop the checkmate. Simply go queen to f7, game over. Queen to d5 is one option to defend the pawn that way, but this completely loses to bishop to c4. It's hitting the queen. It's hitting the f7 pawn behind the queen, so once they save their queen, maybe queen c5, you simply capture here, check. You have to go to d8, now you gobble up this bishop on f8, you have to go to c7, and white is completely winning. Now, just as an example, d4 is crushing. If black captures, you can play bishop to f4. Bishop's lined up on the king. Everything is defended. This is defended. That's defended. The knight defends the bishop. All your pieces are just totally crushing. So let's go back. So after queen h5, we just saw how queen d5 is no good for black. g6, they can try to block your queen, but it really makes this a terrible bishop. And you can follow it up with queen to f3, again, setting up checkmate. And if they block it with the knight, which is really, again, not a lot of options for black, now you can play queen to b3 with another fork, hitting the unprotected b7 pawn, and again, threatening checkmate. So after something like e6, to stop the checkmate, you capture on b7, threatening the rook. They need to save the rook so they can move this knight to d7 to let the queen defend, but now you can follow it up with knight takes c6, hitting their queen. And one little bonus trick I'll show you, after they play queen to c8, you can play bishop to a6, lining up on the queen. When they capture, this rook is trapped. It has nowhere to go. All of these squares are covered, and white is just completely winning. Now the moment you've been waiting for, the checkmate in 6 moves. So if black decides to not bring out this bishop and go for the other plan, plays knight to d7 to set up this knight g to f6, you can set up a really sneaky trap by playing queen to e2. And if black follows through with their plan, can you find the killer move for white? Congratulations, that's correct. Knight to d6 is checkmate. This pawn cannot capture because it's pinned by the queen. And despite the fact that black's king is completely surrounded by his own pieces, he's lost. So, very clever trap. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this in actual games, especially at lower rated players or in speed chess. It happens a lot. So this is a very fun one to look out for. If black is smart enough, he won't do that. He'll move this knight to f6. And this is no longer checkmate. He simply can capture it with his queen. And if he plays this, you can simply play d3 and maybe, g3 later, bishop g2, castle, and you're still slightly better as a white. Not as good as checkmate, obviously, but very playable for white. There you have it. A lot of cool tricks and traps you can play against the Caro-Kann defense. Let me know in the comments below if you try those out, how they work, or if they don't work, what happens. I'd love to hear that and maybe do a follow-up video answering some questions. Thanks a lot.